So many famous people have been involved with this mysterious organization. Names like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, Elizabeth Moss, Kirstie Alley, Laura Prepon, Danny Masterson, and this guy by the name of Bobby Dark Chocolate. And many more. You've definitely heard of it, Scientology. It is a word that will certainly ring some bells for most viewers out there. It's officially recognized as a religion, but it is called a cult by most people on the internet. If you type in Scientology and scroll down, you can see a lot of haters, a lot of slander out there, a lot of defamation, as they would say. But anyways, we're talking about the Scientology rabbit hole in today's video, and it is very deep, and it stinks, and it's unbelievable. So let's start with a simple question. What exactly is Scientology? On paper, it's a religion founded by L. Ron Hubbard in 1953, offering a path to greater self-awareness and spiritual enlightenment through a process called auditing. But the reality of what Scientology is far more complex and disturbing, puckering, I would say. What would you say, little boy? Just kidding. The Holy Relic has his own camera now. Isn't this awesome? About that. Before becoming a religious leader, L. Ron Hubbard made his name writing pulp science fiction. What is pulp science fiction? I don't know. But is there a pulp-free version? Cut that out. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, he cranked out hundreds of stories for magazines like Astounding Science Fiction, scraping by as a moderately successful genre writer. He was kind of the Hitler of pulp science fiction writers. Big failure, to be honest, barely scraping by. This background as a pulpy science fiction writer becomes particularly interesting when you consider that Scientology's core beliefs involve ancient aliens, yes sir, galactic confederacies and souls that have existed for trillions of years. I love aliens, by the way, and I'm not a Scientologist. Yet. We'll wait to the end of the video to decide whether or not I'm gonna become one, all right guys? We'll leave it up to you. If this video gets 100,000 likes, I will become a Scientologist. It's f***ed up, this whole story. It's very f***ed up. For a bit more context on L. Ron Hubbard, there's a quote that actually haunted him for decades. According to several of his contemporaries, Hubbard once declared at a science fiction gathering, a fucking nerd party, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." I'm gonna write that one down. Of course, the church vehemently denies he ever said this because it would erode their legitimacy quite heavily. Yet, multiple witnesses, including science fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon, my favorite, have sworn to hearing similar statements from Hubbard at various nerd parties. The transition for L. Ron Hubbard from fiction writer to religious founder wasn't exactly immediate. In 1950, Hubbard published Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, and marketed it as a revolutionary self-help system. It is a book that promises to cure physical ailments, increase intelligence, and eliminate unwanted emotions, like constipation, for example. People flocked to Dianetics. People were very stupid in the 1950s. It became an instant bestseller, and Hubbard quickly established foundations across the country. Now, why? You know, sure, it promises all these epic things, but what exactly drew people in? The promise of self-improvement without doctors or psychiatrists. That's what drew people in. By the way, L. Ron Hubbard despised both of those professions fairly openly, doctors and psychiatrists. That becomes a cornerstone you'll learn more about. When the initial craze and virality of Dianetics in the 1950s began to fade and the organization faced some financial troubles, Hubbard made a pivotal move. In 1953, he repackaged his science fiction ideas as the Church of Scientology, adding religious elements to his teachings. It wasn't just a philosophical shift either, it was a very strategic shift. Notice how my preface was when the virality of Dianetics started to fade and the organization faced financial troubles. This began crazy. You see, my friends, religious organizations enjoy significant legal protections and tax benefits that self-help groups or honest people just don't get. This guy Ron's a fucking genius or whatever. So what is the appeal exactly? What does Scientology offer that attracts so many followers and has for such a long time, in spite of it just being a made-up science fiction work of nonsense that was built to extract money from people. The main attracting pitch for Scientology is that it offers you a precise scientific method to free you from emotional pain, boost your abilities, and reveal your true potential. This is unlike traditional religions where you ask for faith in unseen gods. Scientology presents itself as practical technology that can deliver measurable results. Don't believe us, they say. Try it for yourself and get your money back, guaranteed. They don't actually say that. New members of Scientology typically start with basic courses focused on communication skills, things like how to smile properly and how to wave. Improper, proper. Note the eyes. I smile with my eyes. Waving as well, here's an example. Newbies also focus on study methods and introductory auditing, which is a form of counseling that uses an e-meter device that supposedly measures emotional reactions, aka fucking nonsense. One thing that's sort of annoying about all this is that this stuff actually kind of works. The initial experiences genuinely can help people feel better. Because when you have someone listen to your problems and promise you solutions, it's very powerful. Normally, professionals just listen to your problems. They don't promise you solutions. They try to find a solution with you. Scientology just cuts out that evidence-based approach and says, you are a trillion-year-old spirit. Nuclear bombs and volcanoes were in your past. Give me money, give me money. To the vulnerable and people who don't feel exactly fulfilled and or maybe feeling lost, this is powerful. Also, the early stages in general of Scientology are not particularly outlandish. They're pretty cool and kind of normal. You see, it's only as members progress up to the bridge to total freedom, is what it's called, as they invest more time and more money, they are gradually introduced to more controversial cosmological beliefs, including the story of Zenu, my grandmother's dog. Wait, no, that was Xena. It was Xena, it wasn't Zenu. For some reason in my head, I was like, my grandmother might be a Scientologist. Zenu is the galactic overlord who allegedly brought billions of his people to Earth 75 million years ago, and then fucking killed them using hydrogen bombs in volcanoes. That is real. That is not a misrepresentation of the core belief of Scientology. That is real. It also took quite a while for Scientology to actually achieve a religious status. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Hubbard fought lengthy legal battles around the world to secure religious recognition, and in the United States, the organization waged fucking war against the IRS for decades before finally gaining its tax-exempt status in 1993, under some mysterious circumstances that we'll explore later. Let's just say I'm waiting on my tax-exempt status too. Just kidding, I'm not, because that alludes to me doing something horrible and evil. I'm not doing that. Across Europe, in countries like Germany, France, and Belgium, Scientology continues to face official skepticism, governmental skepticism, often classified as a business or potential threat rather than religion, which to me makes a lot of sense. But one fascinating aspect of Scientology's history is its hostility towards splinter groups or denominations. Most religions have some kind of denomination or offshoot, some kind of friend church or something. What are ye, Baptist? No, I'm Wesleyan. Whatever that is. Is that a thing? I think that's a thing. Scientology is not so friendly. They attack anyone practicing its trademark techniques outside of the official organization. Independent practitioners, known collectively as the Free Zone, get litigated against frequently. They get frequently. They also get harassed and are labeled as squirrels, which is a pretty bad insult in Scientology, apparently. So we raise a few important questions here. If Scientology truly offers a path to spiritual freedom, why does it require a ruthlessly maintained monopoly on its practices? Strange. You can't be spiritual and also have a proprietary good that you sell. Anyways, this naturally leads us to the cult question. I said the word cult just a moment ago. What makes something a cult rather than a religion? Comment down below. Or not. You're not going to win anything. Scholars typically point to several key factors. A, charismatic leadership. B, isolation from society. C, control of information. D, financial exploitation. And the one after D, psychological manipulation. That's not even a joke. I forgot about E entirely. I started to panic too. Surely, most religions exhibit some of these traits to varying degrees, but cults embody them to a more extreme and systematic level. The institution of Scientology is completely emboldened by all of these things, and then slaps a trademark on it. And if you stray from that path, sued, lawsuit, boom! I'm gonna hit you with a fucking lawsuit, you little fucker. You. Just kidding. Praise be. Let's take the charismatic leader aspect as our first example. Most major religions were indeed founded by fairly charismatic people. Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad. But these faiths evolved beyond total devotion to their leaders. In Scientology, Hubbard remains as the absolute authority, and his words are considered source and cannot be altered or questioned, even decades after his death. Rip, old boy. Shouldn't have been so spiritual and awesome. Maybe you would have lived a little bit longer. The control of the flow of information tells an entirely different story for Scientology. Mainstream religions generally make their core teachings freely available to anyone interested. You can read it online, you can read the Bible online, the Quran, the Buddhist sutras, all without paying a dime. And before the internet, you could just go to a church or a whatever, what is it called? A mosque? That's right. Or a Buddhist one? A temple, I think. You could get them teachings for free, is what you could, but by extreme contrast, Scientology reveals its central cosmological teachings only to members who have paid hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars and also signed strict confidentiality agreements with large legal penalties for disclosure. So join, pay us money, we'll teach you, but you can't say anything about it, because that's the only way we'll make money. Took my jacket off. Financial demands also separate cults from religions even further. While most faith traditions encourage donations, they rarely make spiritual progress contingent on specific payment amounts. But in Scientology, advancing through the different levels of the bridge requires increasingly expensive courses and auditing sessions, with total costs potentially reaching millions of dollars per member. So that really isn't a tithing, I wouldn't say, or passing around a collection plate. When L. Ron Hubbard says, let me hold a 20, he actually means, give me millions of dollars so I can lie to you, you fucking dumbass. That's what he actually meant, I think. To the defenders of Scientology, it provides a structured path to greater awareness, a supportive community, and techniques to overcome past trauma. All pretty cool, valid things, but to its critics, it offers an initially helpful facade that gradually transitions into a system of control, exploitation, and isolation designed primarily to extract the maximum amount of money and loyalty from its followers. It seems like this is an unbiased piece, I promise. It's very unbiased. And as we'll discover throughout this exploration of a video, the reality of Scientology is far stranger than most people realize. Things get so fucking deep, so dark, honestly, and they go places unlike most on earth religions, that is. This is Scientology. It's part business, part intelligence agency, all working in lockstep towards goals established by a science fiction writer who discovered that creating a religion was indeed more profitable than writing about fictional ones. The secrecy behind Scientology is pretty interesting as well. At the heart of it lies one of the most elaborate classification systems ever created for religious teachings. The organization's materials are divided into distinct levels that members can only access after paying for specific courses or demonstrating a sufficient amount of loyalty to either L. Ron Hubbard or the new guy, who we'll talk about pretty soon. The system is not just about spiritual progression, it is about information security and controlling that information and controlling the people of the organization. One interesting factoid is that the church justifies its extreme level of secrecy with seductive logic. You see, unprepared minds like mine and yours could be harmed by exposure to higher level teachings. For example, what happens when you tell a normal person that Zenu's real and you're a trillion years old? They're gonna go, oh! As L. Ron Hubbard once wrote, attempting to instruct a student in the upper levels when he hasn't mastered the basics is like trying to teach calculus to somebody who hasn't learned simple arithmetic. Thank you, L. Ron Hubbard. That's very, very elaborate. I really appreciate it. But that's pretty seductive though. Seems cool. Well, you can't learn this because your head will explode if you try to learn it. So yeah, pretty seductive, pretty reasonable, pretty logical, until you discover what those upper levels actually contain. The journey begins fairly innocently enough, learning how to smile, all that stuff, study techniques, basic auditing, which is the e-meter thing. These introductory materials are labeled Division 6 content and are relatively inexpensive, and they contain little that would raise anyone's eyebrows. As members progress, they move from being pre-clear to clear, which is a term you've probably heard of if you've ever heard of anything that has anything to do with Scientology. Supposedly, clear people are free from the negative effects of their reactive mind, which is the base human mind. Achieving clear status typically costs between $30,000 and $50,000, but when you reach clear, it is just the beginning of the real Scientology journey. At this point, your brain will no longer fucking explode when you hear about Xena, my grandmother's dog or whatever. It's the nipple, the tip of a very, very expensive, insane iceberg. This is where the organization's most closely guarded secrets reside. The levels, particularly OT3, contain the infamous Zenu Story, a galactic dictator who allegedly brought billions of aliens to Earth 75 million years ago, placed them around volcanoes, and then blew them up with hydrogen bombs. Then the disembodied spirits of these aliens, called body thetans, supposedly attach to humans today and cause our problems. Get the f*** off my back, you disgusting beast. Before accessing the OT Zenu materials, members must sign very restrictive confidentiality agreements. Ones like this. I don't know, that might just be a template one, or that could be an actual Scientology one. You read it and decide. According to former high-ranking Scientologist Mike Rinder, these documents include clauses that make members liable for $100,000 in damages for each unauthorized disclosure. And the church has aggressively litigated against people who've published these materials, claiming both copyright infringement and religious persecution. The extreme secrecy extends beyond just the paperwork to Scientology's physical facilities. The organization's most sensitive sites, particularly those housing OT materials, employ elaborate security measures that would impress even a government intelligence agency or the Vatican. Remember that video I made about that? Remember that? Former members like Bobby Dark Chocolate have described fingerprint scanners, motion detectors, multiple security checkpoints, and 24-hour camera surveillance. The church's gold base, this compound in California, is surrounded by spiked fences, motion sensors, and security patrols, which doesn't just keep outsiders from getting in, it also keeps insiders from getting out. Pretty interesting stuff. The church is very serious about preventing those insiders from getting out, especially with sensitive materials. Ex-members have reported that advanced courses can only be studied in secure rooms where no materials can be removed and with constant monitoring to prevent any note-taking or recording. The obsession with information control extends to how Scientology also handles criticisms of its controlled information. When these materials first leaked to the media in the 1970s and 80s, the church didn't just deny its authenticity, they claimed that even reading such materials could cause pneumonia and death to the unprepared, which is so awesome to say that and mean it. Then, in the 1995 court case Church of Scientology International versus Fishman, the church argued that merely exposing someone to these teachings without proper preparation was just harmful in general as well. This secrecy system is so effective. It creates a powerful desire to advance and discover what is being withheld, learning, leveling up. This dude turned self-help into an RPG science fiction game. He turned that shit into Starfield. People invest years of their lives and their fortunes into climbing the bridge, and they are convinced that life-changing revelations await at every single level. To be honest, Tom Cruise is very impressive. He's really impressive for a fucking old man, and John Travolta's not, though. He's hard to look at nowadays. By the time they reach the controversial content about Xenu and body thetans, they're typically so invested that the cognitive dissonance kicks in, the sunk cost fallacy becomes a piercing ring in their ears. It becomes easier to accept the strange teachings than to admit that they've wasted enormous resources on science fiction that has been repackaged as religious truth. Embarrassing! You are, not you. None of you are what? Are you? Are they watching this? This hierarchical treatment of information also serves another purpose, and that is to create a class system within Scientology. Very effective for religions, by the way. Class system is extremely effective, where higher level members feel superior to those who haven't accessed the truth yet. And if you have someone cool at the very tippy top, like Tom Cruise, not like John Travolta. He also lives in London now, and people speculate that he's distanced himself from the Church of Scientology. In most religions, by the way, sacred texts are considered gifts to humanity, freely shared to spread wisdom and enlightenment, but in Scientology, they're treated more like classified government documents or proprietary business secrets. You don't have to work to get there and spend a bunch of time being introspective and meditating and levitating or whatever they do in temples and stuff. You have to pay money and get shocked and taken advantage of and abused by a bunch of people who you've been giving money to. It is a fundamental difference. Now, once you're in Scientology, especially if you join its elite Sea Org, the boundary between devotion and ownership begins to blur and then vanish altogether. The Sea Org isn't just a clergy. It is a paramilitary organization where members sign billion-year contracts pledging to serve. That's f***ing real, dude. The Sea Organization. Look it up. No, just watch this video. You have to sign a billion-year contract and you pledge to serve Scientology, not just in this lifetime, but in all future reincarnations. It's a f***ing billion years. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. You see, I'm saying sea too much. The Sea Org began literally at sea in the late 1960s. You see, facing increasing scrutiny from governments around the world, L. Ron Hubbard established a fleet of ships where he could just do whatever the f*** he wanted and operate beyond national jurisdictions. The flagship, Apollo, became Hubbard's floating headquarters for nearly a decade. And today, the Sea Organization maintains its naval traditions and the same hierarchy from this period, with members wearing naval-style uniforms and using maritime terminology like poop deck. It's really funny. They say poop, and they mean it. Life as a Sea Organ, aka a member of the Sea Org, redefines what commitment actually means. Members typically work 16 to 17-hour days, 7 days a week, and for wages that former members have reported, they amount to between $25 and $50 a week. I could barely get that out without laughing hysterically, because that's really bad, dude. That is so bad. That's below federal minimum wage, but international waters, what are you gonna do? They also eat communally, they sleep in dormitory-style accommodations, and have virtually every aspect of their lives totally controlled by the Sea Organization. A work camp with a religious veneer is how former Sea Org member Mark Headley described it. It's not really what most people picture when they think of religious order. I think of guys with the tops of their head shaved, but they have that ring, the sphincter of hair or whatever, the friar cut or whatever it's called. I like that. I think that's pretty cool, but this is sad. What about things like paternity leave or maternity leave, you might be asking to your phone or television or your phone or television screen right now? I think the most disturbing restrictions of joining the Sea Org are in regard to family planning. This is f***ed up, but multiple former female Sea Org members have testified that they were pressured or ordered to have abortions as children are considered a distraction from their billion-year mission at sea. Even more disturbing is that Claire Headley, who worked directly with Scientology leader David Miskovich, the guy who took over after L. Ron Hubbard died, she filed a lawsuit alleging that she was forced to have 2 abortions during her time in the Sea Org. The case was dismissed on the grounds of religious freedom, but multiple women have corroborated accounts like these to a chilling consistency. And beyond that, for Sea Org members who violate rules or fall short of expectations, punishment comes in the form of the Rehabilitation Project Force, or RPF, which is essentially a prison camp within Scientology. Those assigned to the RPF endure grueling physical labor. They must run everywhere and wear distinctive uniforms and speak only when spoken to, along with undergoing intensive confessionals. This seems horrible. I'm just gonna go out and say it. They're also typically segregated from other Scientologists and forbidden from communicating with family. And former members report RPF assignment lasting years sometimes. So Scientology doesn't just control its most dedicated members, it also exercises remarkable power over the families of all Scientologists through its Disconnection Policy. You probably have heard of this as well. This practice requires Scientologists to completely cut off contact with anyone that is designated as a suppressive person, or SP, including parents, children, and spouses. Everybody, even Your old buddy bumming your young one. So what earns someone the SP designation? Well, criticizing Scientology, speaking to the media, seeking psychiatric help, or simply associating with squirrels, others who have done these things. But the organization frames disconnection as a choice. Former members obviously have come out and described an environment where refusing to disconnect means being labeled an SP yourself, losing your religious community, and potentially your livelihood if you work with other Scientologists. And a lot of people do. They tend to work with other Scientologists because the only way to, it's bad. You can kind of see where all this is heading. And the human cost of this can be devastating. Mike Rinder, once the head of Scientology's Office of Special Affairs, who later became a critic of Scientology, hasn't spoken to his son in over 15 years because he's been disconnected. He became a suppressive person. He left the church. You can't do that. And his daughter didn't even notify him when she was diagnosed with cancer. It's that up. Actress Leah Remini has described how her decision to leave Scientology cost her relationships with friends who remained in the organization. And these aren't isolated incidents. Disconnection has torn thousands of families apart. Very bad, very unethical. Speaking of ethics, within Scientology, behavior is micromanaged through an elaborate ethics system. And unlike ethical frameworks in mainstream philosophy or mainstream religions that focus on moral principles and discipline and things like that, Scientology's ethics system is primarily concerned with productivity and loyalty to the organization. Members can be required to write up their overts, which are transgressions, in detailed confessions that are kept permanently in their ethics files. Everybody is like Frank Sinatra, and Scientology is like the FBI. And conveniently enough, these files can be then used against the people who they're on if they ever are critical about the church. Pretty much the best leverage that has ever existed. It's a really good system. It's a well thought out, good system. It's evil. Further, the ethics system operates through a series of conditions from confusion at the bottom to power at the top, each with specific formulas members must apply to improve their standing in this system. Failing to meet quotas like an elf, or harboring doubts, or even associating with critics can result in being assigned a lower condition, requiring various forms of amends and public confessions, which is f***ing ridiculous. Plus, they got this thing called the Hole, which is probably the most extreme manifestation of Scientology's control system. The Hole is a facility at the organization's Gold Base in California where, according to multiple former executives, senior leadership members, and more, they were confined there for months or even years. Those who spent time in the Hole describe being forced to sleep on the floor, eat slop, and participate in grading confessions and endure physical abuse. Former executives like Mike Rinder report being held there against their will, with security measures being taken to prevent their escape. Now, when you ask about the Hole to the Church of Scientology, the church officially denies its existence in spite of numerous testimonies from high-ranking members who have experienced the Hole firsthand. People who have fallen in the Hole. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. There's no hole. The organization's initial hook for recruiting new members often comes through a seemingly innocent personality test called the Oxford Capacity Analysis, which, despite its name, has no connection to Oxford University. It's just a word, Oxford. This 200-question test invariably identifies areas of concern that test administrators explain Scientology can address through courses and auditing. It's essentially a sales funnel disguised as an IWHYBD test, or whatever, the INFP, I don't know, the millennial one that all the millennials do. Yeah, it's pretty clever, I'll be real with you. It's pretty clever. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, really good ideas, and writing it down. Something else pretty unethical and just unnecessary as well is Scientology's control and its approach to LGBTQ individuals. The church publicly claims that it has no position on sexual orientation, but internal documents tell an entirely different story. L. Ron Hubbard classified homosexuality as a sexual perversion and placed it low on his tone scale of human emotions. Former members report being subjected to auditing sessions that were aimed at handling their sexuality, and Sea Org policy has historically forbidden homosexual relationships. So the Church of Scientology has many mechanisms in place to control its pupils or flock. It's flock. Let's use the word flock because I like saying it. There's a lot, and what makes them particularly effective is how gradually that they're implemented. New members aren't immediately asked to disconnect from family or confess their deepest secrets and say, "I'm gay." Instead, the boundaries of acceptable behavior are slowly shifted over months and years until what would have once seemed unthinkable, like working 100-hour weeks for no pay and cutting off contact with your parents or reporting a spouse's transgressions, eventually comes to feel normal and necessary. The frog doesn't realize it's being boiled until it's too late. So yet again, another comprehensive system of control for Scientology. The economic state of its followers is controlled, its flock, the social state, psychological state, the physical state, all of it goes far beyond what mainstream religions ask of their adherents. Certainly, many faith traditions encourage sacrifice and discipline, but few demand total subjugation, as is seen in Scientology's most dedicated ranks. Behind the gleaming facade of Scientology and the celebrity endorsements from incredibly handsome men like John Travolta lies a disturbing pattern of unexplained disappearances, suspicious deaths, and cases where it kind of seems like, I'm not saying anything, where the practices of Scientology have directly contributed to the tragedies at hand, all right? This isn't missing 411. These aren't missing, disappearing people across the national parks of North America. These are people who are associated with a church that just has a hole. And anyways, the cases aren't ancient history either. They continue until the present day. And perhaps the most high-profile mystery surrounds Shelley Miskovich, wife of Scientology leader David Miskovich, who hasn't been seen publicly since 2007. And as the first lady of Scientology, Shelley was a visible presence at church events and worked alongside her husband in running the organization. Then she suddenly vanished. And former high-ranking Scientologist Mike Rinder, who we've talked about before in this video, has stated that before her disappearance, Shelley had completed some organizational tasks against her husband's wishes, which potentially triggered his notorious and short temper. And after this incident, she disappeared from public view, quite simply. That is f***ing insane. That's just a thing. In 2013, actress Leah Remini, upon leaving Scientology, filed a missing person report with the LAPD, and the LAPD later stated that they had made contact with Shelley and considered the case closed, but they provided no proof of the meeting, and there were no independent verifications of Shelley's well-being that have ever occurred since then. And in 2022, an investigative journalist, Yashir Ali, reported that the LAPD's determination was based on a dubious fingerprint identification rather than direct contact. That seems very mysterious to me. I don't like that very much. Former Scientologists believe Shelley may be held at a secretive church facility called the Church of Spiritual Technology in Twin Peaks, California, and is essentially under house arrest and has been for over 15 years. And the church refuses to comment specifically on Shelley's whereabouts, often saying she's working on church projects, which is such a cop-out, dude. That's what I would say if someone went missing and I was very suspiciously involved and probably the perpetrator. Even more disturbing is the case of Lisa McPherson, whose death in 1995 became one of the most significant scandals in the history of Scientology. McPherson was a dedicated Scientologist that experienced a mental breakdown in Clearwater, Florida after a minor car accident. She removed her clothes and wandered naked down the street, telling paramedics that she needed help. She was taken to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation, something that Scientology vehemently opposes, and church members arrived at the hospital and, against medical advice, took McPherson to the Fort Harrison Hotel, which is Scientology's spiritual headquarters. And there, according to court records, she was placed on an introspection rundown, which is Hubbard's alternative to psychiatric care involving isolation and vitamins. Thank you. Thank you for the vitamins. My mind hurts. Speaking of vitamins, I need to take my vitamins.
I've been a bad boy. I haven't taken my vitamins yet today. I'm missing a few. Interesting.
When you punch me, I drop vitamins instead of coins, like in the Lego games or whatever. For 17 days, McPherson remained at Fort Harrison under the care of Scientology, and when she was finally taken to a real hospital, she was pronounced dead on arrival, and medical examiner Joan Wood initially determined McPherson's death, or cause of death, as being by a blood clot brought on by severe dehydration and bed rest. She was also covered in cockroach bites, had bruises all over her body, and weighed just 108 pounds, having lost approximately 40 pounds during her time under the care of Scientology. The church initially faced criminal charges, which were ultimately dropped, and a wrongful death lawsuit from McPherson's family that was settled under confidential terms. I assume money, hopefully some kind of justice, I have no idea. But disturbingly, after intense pressure from Scientology, the medical examiner Wood changed her findings, contributing to the dropped criminal charges. She later expressed regret for altering her conclusions. That's very, very suspicious. Other cases follow a similar pattern. Ellie Perkins, a dedicated Scientologist and mother in Buffalo, New York, had a son, Jeremy, who clearly suffered from schizophrenia, and following Scientology's anti-psychiatry teachings, she rejected medical treatment for him in favor of vitamins and the processes of Scientology. And in 2003, Jeremy, in the midst of a psychotic episode, stabbed his mother 77 times, killing her. Jeremy felt that he was being poisoned by the vitamins, and after a suicide attempt, killed her. Noah Loddick, a 24-year-old who became involved with Scientology, spent over $5,000 on courses during his brief involvement, and in 1989, after growing increasingly disturbed, he jumped from a 10th-story window to his death, and his parents later discovered he had been told his problems stemmed from events in past lives. Not even real stuff, just in when he was an alien and got bombed atomically. Kyle Brennan, the son of a Scientologist father and a non-Scientologist mother, was diagnosed with depression and prescribed medication, and while visiting his father in 2007, Brennan's Scientologist father allegedly took away his depression medication following church teachings against psychiatry. Days later, Kyle was found dead from a gunshot wound, and that was ruled a suicide. In 2019, a lawsuit was filed regarding the suicide of 27-year-old Scientologist Whitney Mills, and the suit alleges that despite multiple suicide attempts, Scientology practitioners discouraged her from seeking psychiatric help, instead pushing her to use vitamin regimens and church processes. She ultimately took her own life as well. The main connection for these cases is Scientology's rigid opposition to psychiatric care, even in life-threatening situations. Like, I totally get it. Take your vitamins and work out. But also, if reality is coming apart at the seams, 5 methylated B vitamins aren't gonna help, okay? If you're actually seeing Zenu, that's not good. The organization teaches that psychiatry is not just misguided, but is actively evil and part of a global conspiracy to enslave humanity. And this belief, combined with the pressure to handle problems within Scientology, creates a deadly situation for members who are experiencing serious mental health crises and episodes. When confronted with these cases, the church typically points to similar tragedies in other religious contexts or claims that individuals weren't following Scientology practices correctly, and they categorically deny any organizational responsibility, often attacking the credibility of grieving family members who speak out. So, great job, Scientology. Very appreciative. That's an awesome way to handle your problems. They're a religion. They see themselves as an actual religion. It's very telling how Scientology responds to questions about these incidents as well. Rather than expressing sympathy for the deceased and their families or acknowledging that their policies might benefit from some form of review, the organization typically launches counterattacks, aggressive counterattacks against questioners, and uses their considerable money and resources to silence criticism through litigation, intimidation, and or settlement. All large groups do experience tragedies, but Scientology's responses in particular to these deaths and their denial and obfuscation and attack speak volumes in regard to its priorities. Plus the mystery of Shelley Miskovich. I mean, what the is that about? What happens when a religion treats litigation as a weapon? Or when a church allocates more resources to attorneys than to, let's say, for example, charity, okay? For Scientology, lawsuits are not just a defensive measure, they are a tactical weapon in an arsenal of intimidation. It's like that Golden Dome thing that China's been really worried about that we're doing right now, all right? I don't know anything about it, all right? I don't know anything about it. I'd have to say if there was really one thing that separated Scientology from other religious organizations, there's a lot of things, but this one thing really does. That is the aggressive use of litigation. It's so funny, dude. Nothing quite says this religion is awesome and true and correct quite like Massive lawsuits and Saul Goodman. The church has launched thousands of lawsuits, often deploying its massive legal resources to crush opponents through sheer attrition. The strategy wasn't accidental, by the way. It was explicitly designed by L. Ron Hubbard himself. In a 1955 Scientology manual, Hubbard laid out the approach with chilling clarity.
The purpose of the suit is to harass and discourage rather than to win. Don't ever defend, always attack. Find or manufacture enough threat against them to cause them to sue for peace. Originate a black PR campaign to destroy the person's repute and to discredit them so thoroughly they will be ostracized. Blah!
This philosophy undergirds what became known as Scientology's infamous fair game doctrine. In a 1967 policy letter, Hubbard declared that enemies of Scientology, labeled suppressive persons, you've heard that before,
may be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist, may be tricked, sued, or lied to, or destroyed.
And after some public backlash, Hubbard officially canceled this policy in 1968, but with a pretty telling clarification. The cancellation didn't change the treatment of suppressive persons, but merely removed the label fair game because it created bad PR. Seems like they still do it. And former high-ranking Scientologists like Mike Rinder have confirmed that the practices continue unabated, and the name has just changed, but the game has remained the same. Some kind of weird rhyme I just did there, but it's cool. And Scientologists have taken this fair game idea pretty far. In 1979, Scientologists raided government offices, including the IRS's office and the Department of Justice, and stole 50,000 documents related to the church. And 11 top Scientologists, including the wife of L. Ron Hubbard, his wife Mary Sue, were convicted and or imprisoned. They stormed government offices? And how do you do that? How do you get away with that? How do you then go on 25 years later to be recognized legally as a fucking religion and not to pay taxes? How's that work? That seems really suspicious. But it doesn't stop with the government being the target of Scientology. When Time magazine published a critical 1991 cover story titled "Scientology, the Cult of Greed," the church sued for $416 million. And Time Warner ultimately spent over $7 million defending the suit, which was eventually dismissed, but the message to media, crystal clear. Critical coverage comes with a hefty price tag. So they're mean to the government, and they're mean to Time magazine. What about former members? Debbie Cook, once one of Scientology's highest-ranking executives, sent an email to fellow Scientologists questioning current leader David Miskovich's fundraising tactics. The church instantly sued her for violating her confidentiality agreements, and during deposition, Cook provided testimony about abuse that she'd witnessed, including confinement in the hole, where executives were allegedly forced to confess to imagined crimes. The church abruptly settled the case, and that, as most cases do, required the silence of Cook to stay settled. So, problem solved. This verbose approach to litigation has backfired spectacularly in the past. For example, in a case brought by ex-Scientologist Lawrence Wallersheim, a California court didn't beat around the bush. They said Scientology had adapted a policy of intensive and extensive litigation for the purpose of destroying the individuals rather than to protect trade secrets. And Wallersheim was ultimately awarded $8.7 million after a nearly 20-year legal battle. So their lawsuits aren't working as well. They haven't been suing as many people. Even federal judges have faced a similar level of frustration. U.S. District Court Judge James Eidman withdrew from a Scientology case, writing in his recusal,
"The past 8 years have consisted mainly of a prolonged and ultimately unsuccessful attempt to persuade or compel the plaintiff to comply with lawful discovery. These actions have been filings in bad faith, evasions, misrepresentations, broken promises, and lies, but no compliance."
So that's a pretty bad look when f***ing district court judges are telling you that you're a piece of shit. So yeah, pretty crazy.
Scientology also employs a technique called dead agenting, which systematically attacks critics' credibility through investigations into their personal lives. The church will hire private investigators to dig through critics' garbage, scrutinize their tax records, interview neighbors and associates, and look for any compromising information to use against them, to dead agent them. Websites, publications, and social media campaigns are created to discredit opponents, and they often continue for decades. The goal is not to just win an argument, it's to destroy the arguer. One of the most infamous examples of this is Operation Freakout, which is a documented Scientology campaign to have author Paulette Cooper either imprisoned or committed to a mental institution after she wrote a critical book in 1971. Church operatives stole her personal stationery and used it to send threats. The church framed her. The plot was only uncovered when FBI raids related to Operation Snow White revealed internal documents detailing the conspiracy. Operation Snow White, by the way, we'll talk about that. Cooper was nearly driven to suicide before her name was eventually cleared, thankfully. And even in 2007, BBC journalist John Sweeney was filming a documentary on Scientology when he found himself followed by PIs, and he was harassed at his hotel and subjected to intense pressure. Representatives of the church interrupted his interviews and filmed him continuously. And during one confrontation, Sweeney, under extreme stress from the harassment, lost his temper on camera, which Scientology promptly used to discredit him. And in his follow-up documentary, Sweeney presented evidence of the elaborate campaign to provoke and undermine him, which is a strange policy, strange thing to do for a church. Another disturbing aspect of Scientology's aggressive tactics is the R245, a term Hubbard used in multiple documents early on. And in Scientology terms, R245 stated purpose is to exteriorize someone, which is to separate their spirit from their body, using a .45 caliber official Sour Boys pistol. Just kidding. But that does exist. That is a real pistol. That does exist, and you shouldn't do that. That's bad. The church's official stance on R245 is that it was merely Hubbard's dark humor. Liberals, come on. So with all these tactics, it's no surprise that many former members remain silent about their experiences out of fear. If they're not like Leah Remini, where they can find a platform to speak themselves, they have to actually fight Scientology in the fucking court, and they have way less money, so they're going to lose. It's a really well-written system, in all honesty, by old L. Ron Hubbard. So that's right, think twice before covering Scientology critically. Speaking of Leah Remini, though, in 2023, she filed a suit against the Church of Scientology alleging harassment, stalking, and defamation since her departure. This case will test whether courts will continue to allow this insane practice under the protection of religious freedom. And they also don't have to pay fucking taxes. How is that fair? So yeah, they sued Asylum's critics. It's not even a conspiracy. It is legitimately what they write. The organization views litigation primarily as a weapon to harass fair game. Now, Scientology is not the only controversial organization to face allegations of impropriety. Take the Bannered Mare, for example. Scientology stands in a class of its own, having been implicated in what the FBI described as the largest domestic espionage operation in American history, potentially the history of the world. Scientologists carried out Operation Snow White in the mid-1970s, and that involved, what we talked about a little bit before, Scientologists infiltrating, burglarizing, and wiretapping over 136 government agencies, foreign embassies, and private organizations. The goals of the operation were twofold: to purge government files of unfavorable operation about Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, and to identify and neutralize critics of the organization. Under the direction of Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue, who led Scientology's Guardian's Office, which was the precursor to today's Office of Special Affairs, operatives systematically infiltrated organizations including the IRS, DOJ, FDA, and even foreign governments. The true scope of the matter is enough to take your breath away. So how the did they do this? They secured employment as clerks and secretaries in targeted agencies. They stole thousands of documents in those positions, planted bugs in government offices, and even infiltrated the IRS Chief's Counsel's office. And according to FBI documentation, they also infiltrated the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, and the Better Business Bureau, all organizations that they perceived as enemies. Imagine being an enemy of the BBB, sending your paramilitary organization after them. This little son of a bitch is thinking about that, I bet. Look at that fucker looking at your soul. Look at him in there. Press like, he says. Press the like button if you want to see more Holy Relic content. Don't do that. He's fucking lying to you. He has no control over me. Operation Snow White finally unraveled when Michael Meisner, one of the Scientologists involved, became concerned about his own legal exposure and surrendered to federal authorities. And his testimony led to FBI raids on Scientology offices in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. in July of 1977, where agents discovered overwhelming evidence of the conspiracy. Oh my God, these people are freaks! The raids uncovered a treasure trove of incriminating documents, including plans for Operation Snow White and other covert operations that they planned. And these documents revealed not just the infiltration of government agencies, but also campaigns against specific individuals who were critical of Scientology. The government's case was so strong that 9 senior Scientologists, including Mary Sue Hubbard, ultimately pled guilty to conspiracy and theft charges, and they received prison sentences ranging from 4 to 5 years, though these were later reduced. Hubbard himself was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, but managed to avoid prosecution by going, you guessed it, into f***ing hiding. With the Sea Org, he went to sea. Operation Freakout, by the way, which we talked about earlier, the operation where Scientologists tried to basically make the woman who wrote an article go f***ing insane and go into a mental institution, freak out, that was uncovered by Operation Snow White being uncovered. And after all of that, L. Ron Hubbard went into hiding. And after L. Ron Hubbard went into hiding, he remained in hiding until his death in 1986. It's f***ing crazy, dude. Now we just await for his great return, riding on the backs of Zenu and his fleshy thorax. This is really big business stuff. The leader of your cult goes into hiding after you try to make a woman freak out so bad she has to go to a psychiatric hospital or die. And you also get caught infiltrating a bunch of government agencies and basically destroying evidence and stealing shit, and a lot of your higher up members are fucking charged and go to jail. After those convictions, Scientology attempted to distance itself from that criminal activity, claiming it was the work of rogue elements that had since been purged. However, documents and testimony from former members indicate that Hubbard himself had ordered the operations and that the Guardian's office was simply following his explicit policies on handling perceived enemies. So it's like they tried to operate CIA style with a level of compartmentalization that would allow the Guardian's office to be seen as a scapegoat, but it's not true. So as an institution, Scientology sees itself as above the law, and it did in the beginning, and who knows, maybe it still does now. That's a pretty big conspiracy, but beyond that, Scientology has faced other serious criminal allegations. For example, its drug rehabilitation program, Narconon, has been the subject of multiple investigations for fraud, practicing medicine without licenses, and deceptive marketing. What's interesting is that it is presented as secular to clients and government agencies, but internal Scientology documents have revealed that Narconon is considered an important recruitment channel to Scientology. Multiple deaths have occurred at Narconon facilities, leading to wrongful death lawsuits and facility closures in multiple states. And in recent years, former Scientology members have filed lawsuits alleging human trafficking, labor violations, all particularly within the Sea Org. Claire Headley has a lawsuit where she claims she was forced to work 100-hour weeks for minimal pay, denied medical care, and was coerced into having abortions and prevented from leaving church property, which, you know, we've talked about multiple other instances of that throughout this video. And once again, her case was dismissed on the grounds of freedom of religion. Actor Danny Masterson, a prominent Scientologist, was convicted in 2023 of raping 2 women. And during his trial, victims testified that the Church of Scientology had actively discouraged them from reporting the assaults to police and pressured them to handle the matter internally. The women subsequently filed a lawsuit against the church alleging harassment and intimidation after they came forward. Very bad stuff. I don't know why people even take it seriously even a little bit. I don't think that there's that many people joining Scientology nowadays. We'll get into that, but it's amazing that it's been able to run on for so long. To be fair to Scientology though, this level of conspiracy isn't anything new for controversial religious organizations, but it's been a really long ass time since stuff like this happened, like the Knights Templar and Crusades and stuff. Operation Snow White is like a modern day version. It's not a spontaneous thing. It's a meticulously planned multi-year operation done with intelligence agents and the scale is mind-boggling. And somehow
it's still allowed. It's still f***ing religion, and they don't have to pay taxes. Are you f***ing kidding me? So how exactly does Scientology respond? Well, the response is incredible. Take a guess down below, or think in your head. How do you think Scientology typically responds to the confrontation of criminal matters? The Scientologists typically respond in 3 ways. They deny the allegations entirely. They will claim they reflect on past mistakes and those mistakes have been corrected, or they assert religious freedom protections. The institution is not one to demonstrate accountability or transparency in addressing wrongdoing or in any other way, even though they have courses available online right now that are free. You've heard me haranguing throughout this video on Scientology for not having to pay taxes, because quite frankly, I'm jealous. And few aspects of Scientology have generated more controversy than its financial practices. For decades, the church engaged in an epic battle with the IRS, David and Goliath, arguably its most formidable adversary, and it finally culminated into a settlement so f***ing unusual that tax experts still study it with bewilderment today. The conflict began back in 1967 when the IRS revoked Scientology's tax-exempt status, determining it a f***ing cult. They didn't say that. They didn't say that. They said it was a commercial business benefiting private individuals, particularly the CEO, L. Ron Hubbard. Court records from the 1980s reveal Hubbard had taken tens of millions of dollars from church coffers through various schemes, including consulting fees and percentages from every Scientology organization worldwide, which you're not supposed to do that when you have a religion. Not saying they're the only ones to do that. You know, there's the prosperity gospel, obviously, and there's a lot of... Have you ever seen Righteous Gemstones? I mean, come on. Scientology's response to this was multi-pronged and unprecedented. Beyond the infiltration of the IRS offices during Operation Snow White, the organization and its members filed over 2,300 lawsuits against the agency and its officials, and individual IRS employees found themselves personally targeted, with Scientologists digging through their garbage, investigating their private lives, and creating dossiers on alleged improprieties, like the ones at the Baynard Mare. The war reached its climax in the early 1990s when David Miskovich, who had taken control of Scientology following L. Ron Hubbard's death, made an unannounced visit to the IRS Commissioner's office with attorney Monique Yingling. This led to a series of private meetings outside normal IRS procedures, and finally in 1993, the IRS reversed decades of policy and granted Scientology tax exemption as a religious organization. Are you fucking kidding me? They got old Monique Yingling in there, fucking swinging dick, all right? Fucking just goosh, laying out on the table, goosh. How about this? I like to imagine that someone high up in the IRS, this is my imagination by the way, got audited and confessed to a bunch of things, or maybe not even someone high up in the IRS, maybe someone just high up in the government was a part of Scientology and then confessed to a bunch of stuff, you know, classic epic big money style. Because it seems incredibly fucking suspicious, and documents revealed extraordinary concessions by the IRS, including exemptions for hundreds of Scientology entities, dismissal of tax bills estimated at nearly $1 billion, and an unusual agreement for Scientology to pay just $12.5 million in tax. And in exchange, Scientology dropped its thousands of lawsuits. So that's fucking unbelievable. It is truly unprecedented, and it makes no sense, and it's really scary. Obviously, they've fallen off pretty hardcore since then, but the 90s, what a time to be alive. If I would have made this video in 1994 or 1990, they would have tried to probably kill me, it seems like. They would have Operation Freakouted me. There is no other religious organization that has ever achieved such an agreement or such a high level negotiation one-on-one with the IRS. This has never happened, and it probably will never happen ever again. This is a one-on-one thing with Scientology. And as you might expect, the tax exemption completely transformed Scientology's finances and allowed it to amass wealth without the tax burdens faced by commercial enterprises like Sour Boys, available at sour.gg, and or the Gump Club, available at gump.club. Become a shareholder today. And now today, the church claims to use its resources to advance religious activities, but critics, like myself, point to the hilarious disparity that shows, in spite of reported declining membership, Scientology's real estate holdings have fucking exploded. So it's kind of the BlackRock of religions, I guess, in a weird kind of way. In Clearwater, Florida alone, a Tampa Bay Times investigation revealed that between 2016 and 2019,
Companies tied to Scientology doubled the church's footprint, acquiring approximately $103 million in property under anonymous LLCs before transferring them to church ownership. Similar patterns to this have played out in other cities like Los Angeles, New York, and just foreign worldwide places that I just, quite frankly just don't care about, all right? Press like. So aside from just being basically the Bill Gates of religions, as well as the sort of, any other analogy I've made throughout this long ass fucking video, I'm sorry by the way, why are you still watching? The church also maintains a network of lavish facilities catering primarily to the celebrities and wealthy members at the tippy top and the bitty bottom. This includes the Celebrity Center in Hollywood and the Flagland Base in Clearwater, which features hotel-like accommodations and amenities. Meanwhile, the people who actually work here, according to Sea Org members, former Sea Org members, staff at these facilities typically earn between $25, $50 a week, and they work 100 hours. Where do they get all this money from? No, that's what I want to know. Well, luckily I know. Scientology has developed a sophisticated fundraising machine. New members begin by paying for the introductory courses that we've talked about, the auditing and all that shit, and they eventually advance up to the bridge to total freedom, which is this diagram here. It's very interesting. Each level requires increasingly expensive payments, reaching the highest published level, OT V4. I think that's 9. I'm not good with Roman numerals, and that typically costs between $300,000 and $500,000. That's the highest published level on the bridge to Terabithia, or whatever the it's called, the bridge to total freedom. It's a cool looking diagram. Honestly, I want to sign up. It feels like a fucking video game. I'm signing up. Just kidding. What if I did though? What if I just joined Scientology for a bit? Would they kill me? Think they'd find me and kill me, harass me? Maybe they wouldn't. Yeah, I'd probably be one of those SPs. Yeah, they'd probably see me as an SP. And you know what I'd do? I'd mail a piece of shit to them. I'd literally shit in a piece of mail, and I'd mail that piece of mail and that piece of shit with the inside the piece of mail right to their big ass blue, ugly, mutant Disneyland headquarters in Los Angeles. Just kidding. What if I got shit in the mail? That'd be really funny. So those are the service fees. On top of that, Scientology aggressively solicits donations for various initiatives from its members as well. They report intense pressure to contribute to building funds, humanitarian campaigns, and the International Association of Scientologists. Former members describe fundraising events where wealthy Scientologists are publicly recognized for donations reaching millions of dollars, creating a status competition that then drives even larger contributions. At one event documented in Alex Gibney's documentary Going Clear, a very popular anti-Scientologist hit piece, a Scientologist donated $1 million only to be told it wasn't enough and then pressured to increase his donation to $5 million. Former members report selling homes, emptying retirement accounts, and accumulating massive credit card debt to meet donation expectations. Interest, my friend, it is the most powerful force. Then comes what exactly the donations are used for. There's the anti-drug campaigns, there's the initiatives, the humanitarian efforts, or, as I like to call it, marketing. That's what I call that stuff, marketing. So we get it, Scientology likes money a lot, and they like to get their members to donate. What if you're a famous person, like John Travolta or Tom Cruise? Well, in that case, you get preferential treatment. According to multiple accounts from former staff, celebrities often receive free or heavily discounted services that ordinary members must pay full price for, with the expectation that these celebrities will publicly promote Scientology, like I'm gonna do soon in my videos, because I'll be sponsored by Scientology. Meanwhile, you get people out there making $25 a week, not an hour, a week. Financial transparency, absent. Most nonprofit organizations in the US must file detailed financial disclosures, AKA Form 990 with the IRS. Churches are exempt from this requirement, and since Scientology is a church, why the f are churches exempt from that requirement? That seems unbelievable. But many mainstream religious organizations do voluntarily publish their financial statements. Take example, these. Scientology keeps its finances strictly confidential. The whole thing is so strange because of how powerful Scientology seemed in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, with it going toe-to-toe with the IRS, then winning, and now it's just getting constantly berated online. It's a joke, really, is what it is nowadays, but still, they have this insane real estate portfolio, but declining membership. It's suspicious. According to religious surveys and census data for multiple countries, active Scientology memberships appear to have dropped significantly
over the past 2 decades, which checks out, as the internet has become more readily available. The American Religious Identification Survey found the number of Americans identifying as Scientologists fell from 55,000 in 2001 to just 25,000 in 2008, while more recent estimates suggest even lower numbers. So they're a minority. There's not that many Scientologists. There's 1.4 billion Catholics out there. Fist fight. Let's have a fist fight. And may the best man win. So the important question is Scientology a religious organization that happens to be wealthy, or is it an insanely intelligent, genius L. Ron Hubbard W. wealth accumulation vehicle operating under religious protection? I think the latter. If there is one enemy that has remained constant throughout Scientology's history, it is psychiatry and mental treatment. L. Ron Hubbard does not like it when people are mentally well, okay? He can't make money from them. He declared psychiatrists are not merely mistaken, but they are actively evil, part of a global conspiracy to enslave humanity. I casually mentioned that earlier. You thought I was just gonna skate by that and not delve deeper into it? This isn't a side issue for Scientology. It is a core belief that has had devastating consequences. Hubbard's antagonism towards psychiatry began very early in his career as a dumbass. After releasing Dianetics in 1950, he faced criticism from psychiatric professionals who questioned his claims of curing physical ailments through addressing engrams. That's right, like in f***ing ARC, aka traumatic memories. Like an ARC. Rather than engaging with this criticism scientifically, Hubbard developed an elaborate conspiracy theory. Dude is a f***ing genius. And this was, psychiatrists were suppressing Dianetics because it threatened their control over the population. In 1969, Hubbard wrote Today's Terrorism, which declared psychiatry responsible for all the major catastrophes of history, including the fall of Rome, World Wars I and II, and the decline of the West. He claims psychiatrists had been working for centuries to control mankind through mental health using implanted devices and mind control. This guy's f***ing wild. We need to put this guy on an SSRI ASAP. Just kidding. He died. He was in hiding. Sorry, that's not very nice. This opposition evolved from rhetoric to organized action in 1969 when Hubbard established the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, the CCHR, which was officially described as a watchdog to investigate and expose psychiatric human rights violations. And while legitimate concerns exist about the abuse in psychiatry, of course, it's a massive field. Every massive field that deals with people's health is gonna have a ass load of failures and all this stuff. We didn't even know germs were a thing until like a couple hundred years ago, all right? But the CCHR's approach goes far beyond reasonable criticism. The CCHR operates museums titled Psychiatry and an Industry of Death in Los Angeles and Clearwater, Florida, which features exhibits claiming that psychiatrists were behind the Holocaust and that they deliberately cause violence to profit from social chaos, and that psychiatric medications are a form of population control. And school groups are regularly invited to tour these facilities, which is just like, what the f***? It's wild. The organization also produces very professional-looking documentaries with similar claims distributed to politicians, schools, and community groups. And these materials rarely identify their connection to Scientology, of course, and instead they present themselves as independent human rights organizations, which is a tactic that critics have called deceptive, because it is. Beyond their propaganda, Scientology has engaged in, by the way, I don't think psychiatric propaganda is good either, just so you guys know. I'm very pro eating healthy and all that stuff. I think exercise is as effective as almost anything, unless you have a real, actual problem that can't just be easily corrected by changing your habits. Of course, that exists. And you should exercise all opportunities to become healthy. Scientology, on the other hand, has engaged in direct campaigns against psychiatric medications, particularly targeting Prozac in the 1990s after the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly released this antidepressant. The CCHR launched a massive campaign linking the drug to violence and suicide. When a mentally ill man who had briefly taken Prozac killed several people in a shooting, Scientology seized on the tragedy and funded lawsuits against Eli Lilly and published full-page advertisements condemning the medication, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with being critical of some kind of medication or something, especially when there's a link that can potentially be corroborated, whatever. But this is on the behalf of a evil organization, an actually evil organization that doesn't believe you should just be healthy. It believes you need to give them an assload of money, and in order to do that, you have to take vitamins. And if you're schizophrenic, then you will, I guess, just die. I don't really know what you're supposed to do. Now, so what's Scientology's alternative to psychiatric care? It's called the Purification Rundown. It's a program that involves daily sauna sessions of up to 5 hours, vigorous exercise, and massive doses of vitamins and minerals, particularly niacin, in amounts far exceeding recommended safe limits. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people do this. The niacin flushing has been a thing that it's very well studied, actually, and it does have a lot of health benefits. It can have a lot of health benefits, but what Scientologists claim is outside the realm of what exists within science. So we have to keep that in mind. Just because there's something good going on in something doesn't mean that the whole thing's good and vice versa. Take this next part, for example, to really prove that point home. Hubbard claimed this process removes drug residues and toxins stored in body fat. But medical experts have repeatedly warned the purification program poses significant health risks, including dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and liver damage. The organization's rejection of psychiatry extends to its drug rehab program, Narconon, the one we talked about earlier. You know, the secular one? They say it's a scientific approach to addiction treatment, but in reality, Narconon's methods are based entirely on L. Ron Hubbard's writings and include the Purification Rundown. Multiple deaths have occurred at Narconon facilities, with investigations revealing inadequate medical supervision. Unqualified staff and former Narconon employees have testified that the program serves primarily as a recruitment funnel for Scientology rather than an evidence-based addiction treatment center. The human cost for Scientology's anti-psychiatry crusade is difficult to quantify, but it is impossible to ignore. Countless Scientologists suffering from treatable mental health conditions have been denied effective care and instead receive auditing and vitamins with no scientific support whatsoever. The best part is they don't even take the country boy method and say, that shit ain't real. You got anxiety? You're just fucking sad, or whatever, go stand in the sun, or you. They say that it's a result of your own ethical failings and from your past lives, which is total bullshit. And a little cherry on top, L. Ron Hubbard himself appears to have used psychiatric medications. Journalist Tony Ortega reported that when authorities examined Hubbard's personal possessions after his death in 1986, they discovered psychiatric drugs, including Vistaril, which is used to treat anxiety. And if true, this suggests L. Ron Hubbard denied his followers treatments that he himself utilized, which is classic charismatic leader stuff. And being the Church of Scientology and having an intelligence agency like Mossad, they got their ear to the ground, they're always listening, they're always confronting people. They're always confronting. When confronted with the evidence of people dying after following Scientology's anti-psychiatric teachings, the church typically deflects responsibility and blaming individuals for not correctly applying Hubbard's techniques or claiming that they had underlying problems. Pretty epic, I guess. The organization has never acknowledged any need to reevaluate its position, even as modern psychiatric treatments have evolved far beyond the electroshock and lobotomy procedures that Hubbard originally condemned. So you could say he was right about that. I do agree. Those were barbaric times back in the old lobotomy days. Another thing that makes Scientology's war on psychiatry particularly dangerous is its political dimension. The CCHR actively lobbies for legislation restricting psychiatric practice and medication, particularly for children, and they've successfully pushed for laws in some states making it harder for schools to recommend mental health evaluations for struggling students. And sure, as much as you might want to say there's the overprescription of all these different things, absolutely 110%. But this is once again from the perspective of Scientology, not from the perspective of a rational person who is concerned with your health, which I would come from that perspective. Let's look at science, evidence, try everything instead of just the easy thing or the thing that's because of L. Ron Hubbard wrote it. Come on. It is a crusade against evidence-based mental health care, and it represents one of the clearest examples of how Scientology beliefs can directly harm its members and potentially the broader public because, all these fake-ass secular arms of the organization. This part's called Tom Cruise's Cock, and this part is about the fact that nothing has boosted Scientology's profile and recruitment efforts quite like its association with handsome Hollywood celebrities, particularly Tom Cruise. He's been in the news. He's always in the news. Seems like a really cool guy. And his devotion to the organization has made him both its greatest asset and, at times, its most visible liability. Especially when he was jumping on that couch with Oprah, and that was weird, wasn't it?
We're talking about war in the world.
Just in case you were wondering, the relationship between Scientology and celebrity culture is not accidental. It was a deliberate strategy that was crafted by L. Ron Hubbard himself. In 1955, Hubbard authored Project Celebrity, a policy explicitly targeting famous individuals for recruitment to the Church of Scientology. The document included a list of specific celebrities Scientologists should approach, including Greta Garbo, Walt Disney, Orson Welles, and this fella named Bobby Dark Chocolate. Hubbard wrote, "It is obvious what would happen to Scientology if prime communicators benefiting from it would mention it." Then he offered rewards to Scientologists who successfully recruited celebrities from his list, which extended beyond just those people. And by the way, Bobby Dark Chocolate's not real. I keep saying that, it's not fucking real. It's not a real guy unless you want it to be. Comment down below. We'll make him real. This focus on famous recruits led to the establishment of Scientology's celebrity centers, which are specialized facilities offering a more luxurious and exclusive environment than just standard Scientology organizations. The flagship Celebrity Center in Hollywood occupies a spectacular Gothic revival mansion and features amenities including fine dining, manicured gardens, and a spa-like atmosphere. Former Scientology executives have confirmed that these facilities exist specifically to cater to the wealthy and influential, providing a sanitized version of Scientology away from the more demanding environment of regular missions and poor people. The strategy's worked pretty fucking well and has yielded significant results over the decades. The high-profile members serve a crucial function for the organization. They provide positive public relations, attract new recruits, and lend an air of legitimacy and glamour to Scientology's image. There's also a couple YouTubers that have been included in the ranks. One more recently fucking disappeared. But nobody has been more valuable to Scientology than Tom Cruise. And since his introduction to the organization in the late 1980s through his first wife, Mimi Rogers, who looks like this, I don't know, Cruise has become the most visible face of Scientology worldwide. Asymmetrical, but visible. According to multiple former high-ranking Scientologists, including Mike Rinder, our friend of the show, and Mark Rathburn, Cruise receives extraordinary treatment within the organization, with Sea Org members detailed to serve his needs, renovate his properties, and even help select his romantic partners. He also has a relationship with Scientology's leader, David Miskovich, which has been particularly close, with Miskovich reportedly serving as best man at his wedding with Katie Holmes, which is so fucking weird. Former exec Mark Rathburn claimed that Miskovich views Cruise as an essential asset to the organization's future and declares him the most dedicated Scientologist I know. And that was in a widely publicized 2005 award ceremony. God, so fucking strange. The special treatment extends to protection from Scientology's more demanding aspects. According to former insiders, while ordinary Scientologists might face intense ethics handlings for minor infractions, celebrities are shielded from the organization's harsher disciplinary practices. The goal seems to be to ensure they remain enthusiastic as ambassadors for Scientology, unburdened by the restrictions and punishments that poors face. The poor, the brokies, they call them. I think they don't call them that. They might though. Who knows? Cruise's promotion of Scientology reached an inflection point in 2005 when he engaged in a series of bizarre, high-profile media appearances that caused a bit of scrutiny, I would say. He criticized psychiatry and antidepressants during an interview with Matt Lauer on the Today Show. It's very uncomfortable. You've probably seen the clip. It's really odd.
Clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject.
And you should. And you should do that also, because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing
I'm
really...
not prescribing Ritalin, Tom.
I've never agreed with psychiatry.
A lot of people bring it up now outside of the lens of Scientology, and sure, okay, whatever. Before you get on any products and work out and all that stuff, or do it all at the same time, whatever. You know, piss up a rope if you want. I don't care. He then had the infamous couch jumping on Oprah, and then a leaked internal Scientology video showed Cruise speaking passionately about the organization's mission. All these things damaged both his public image and Scientology's reputation, because he seemed like a fucking freak weirdo, dude. Not many super famoids have left it though. You've got the John Travoltas and the Tom Cruise. I think those are the two most famous people who are involved, at least the two most famous people who are also celebrities. And they're still with it, in spite of them seemingly distancing themselves from it over the last couple of years. Probably because the fact that former members have alleged that Scientology maintains significant leverage over these people. Because remember guys, when you audit them, you learn secrets about people. In the auditing sessions that have definitely been done to celebrities, members are encouraged to reveal their most intimate secrets, which are meticulously documented. And while the church vehemently denies using this information for blackmail, Of course they do. Former executives, including Mike Rinder, have suggested that fear of having these confessions exposed helps keep high-profile members from leaving or criticizing the organization. Because if you say, one time I don't know, did something bad, and then they're like, well, thank you. That happened in a past life. Thank you, Zenu, or whatever the fuck. But remember, if you ever leave, we'll kill you with it. We'll kill you with the claim. Another bad part about the celebrity aspect of Scientology is that Scientology uses these famous people being members as success stories or evidence of Scientology's effectiveness while hiding the experiences of countless non-celebrities who have lost their fortunes, families, sometimes their lives, all through their involvement with the organization. The implication is that Scientology worked for Tom Cruise, it'll work for you. And I've got to say, he's impressive. He's a pretty impressive guy. He looks young, and he's not. And he runs a lot, and that's impressive, and he's been in a lot of movies, but you're just regular. They ain't gonna treat you good. Oh, and if you're interested in this weird science-based magic and ability of addressing your trauma, look into things like hypnosis or autogenic conditioning. These are all real things that Olympians have used to actually make themselves better people, and they're all free, and you don't have to pay any dollars for it. And you can kind of do it to improve your self-worth or your personal security or just how you feel in a pinch. There's apps. And there's nothing at all that you have to pay anybody to get to feel better. It's all there, unless it's like your insurance and then psychiatry. But I don't know. You know. Scientology presents itself as a global religious movement that is accepted worldwide, but the reality is far more complex. Different countries have responded to the organization in radically different ways, creating a patchwork of legal statuses that reflects broader questions about religious freedom, cult regulation, and the boundaries between spiritual practice and commercial enterprise. McDonald's, but with God. For reasons I probably could figure out, Germany has taken perhaps the strongest stance against Scientology among Western democracies. Since the 1990s, German authorities have categorized Scientology not as a religion, but as an anti-constitutional organization with commercial objectives. This classification has placed it under surveillance by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, which is Germany's domestic intelligence agency, which monitors groups considered potential threats to the democratic order. This stance, if you couldn't guess, stems from Germany's post-World War II vigilance against totalitarian movements. German officials have cited Scientology's hierarchical structure, its treatment of critics, and its alleged exploitation of members as justifications for monitoring, which makes perfect sense, because imagine if a government was as exploitative. Wait a second. I smell bullshit. I'm just making jokes about the American government and our intelligence agencies and our banana republics and all that, you know. Yeah, it's just classic meme, 15 hours into a video. Why are you still watching? For real, I don't understand this. Consequences for German Scientologists can be pretty significant. Some have been excluded from civil service positions, political parties, and even private business associations due to their affiliation with the church. The United States government has taken a markedly different approach after granting Scientology tax-exempt religious status in 1993, which still gets me fired up. American authorities have generally treated Scientology as they would any other religious organization. The U.S. State Department has even criticized countries like Germany and France for their restrictions on Scientology, framing the issue as one of religious freedom rather than consumer or psychological protection, which we do have that epic constitution, but come on. Don't change it, of course, but like the IRS stuff's really scary, and like they got dirt on somebody. That's really important, obviously. Clearly. No, that's allegations. That's not real. I'm just kidding. Leave it in now. The stark contrast between Western allies has created some diplomatic tensions. The U.S. State Department's annual International Religious Freedoms Report regularly criticized Germany's treatment of Scientologists, while German officials express frustration at what they see as American naivete about Scientology's nature and activities, which I think I'm on Germany's side. France has similarly rejected Scientology's religious claims, defining it legally as a sect or a fucking cult in English. In 2009, a French court convicted Scientology's French branch of fraud and imposed significant fines. Though the organization avoided being banned entirely, it still operates under strict scrutiny with requirements for transparency that don't apply to other recognized religious groups. Russia's approach has evolved over time towards increasing restrictions. In 2021, Russian authorities declared the Church of Scientology of Moscow and the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises an undesirable organization, effectively banning its operation in the country, and Scientology materials have been declared extremist, and the organization has faced raids, property seizures, and criminal investigations. Scientology's status in the UK underwent a bit of a shift in 2013 when the Supreme Court ruled that a Scientology chapel constituted a place of worship, which overturned decades of precedent that had denied the organization religious recognition there. That's why Tom Cruise lives in London now. This is probably the most recent major victory for Scientology, and that was in a country where it had long sought for legitimate religious status. Australia's relationship with Scientology has come full circle. There was a damning 1965 Anderson report that led Victoria to ban Scientology practices outright, which is the first jurisdiction worldwide to do so. Australia did eventually soften its stance, but in 1983, the High Court of Australia's decision in Church of the New Faith versus Commissioner of Payroll Tax recognized Scientology as a religion for tax purposes, which is a ruling that has influenced religious classifications in multiple countries. So yeah, every country seems to treat it on the whole a bit differently. The United States prioritizes broad religious liberties and protections, which is awesome, and I love America and I love the Constitution of the United States of America, but come on! Tax exemption, that seems so suspicious. The other stuff, okay, but the tax exemption, what the f? European countries with their totalitarian fascism seem to emphasize their duty to protect citizens from potentially exploitative organizations regardless of their religious claims. What the f does that even mean, Europe? I'm just kidding. I'm just making a joke, Heimer. So yeah, beyond governmental actions, Scientology has engaged in conflicts with other notable and powerful institutions. Take, for example, the fucking internet. Not the current battle that they're losing massively, but the battle with the internet in the 1990s when early online critics began sharing the organization's confidential materials. Those pesky file sharing sites. What are they called? Forums? I don't fucking know. Scientology responded with aggressive copyright claims, lawsuits, and even raids on critics' homes to seize computers, which is fucking insane. They had an epic and dramatic internet backfire in 2008 when, after all their nonsense, infellers known as Anonymous, I guess it was kind of anonymous, but also 4chan, before it was deleted, well before it was deleted in 7-Eleven-chan, I don't fucking remember. A bunch of people who later were wearing Guy Fawkes masks, so anonymous, I guess, launched what was called Project Chanology. It was a coordinated campaign against Scientology and what they viewed as censorship and abuse. They did a bunch of fun things against them, like making fun of Tom Cruise a lot. Scientologists called the Chanologists cyber terrorists. They weren't very happy with this campaign, and they got DDoSed and attacked in a bunch of other fun internet ways that are pretty epic. Black faxes, prank calls, you name it. Then there were also protests. So, it was pretty big. Chanology, Project Chanology, Operation Chanology, whatever you want to call it. Plus, if you didn't know, Scientology has been fighting Wikipedia for decades. The online encyclopedia's requirement for reliable, verifiable sources has frequently clashed with Scientology's desire to control the public narrative. And according to reports by former Wikipedia administrators, Scientology has employed numerous strategies to influence its Wikipedia articles, from coordinated editing campaigns to legal threats. In response, Wikipedia implemented special rules for Scientology-related topics, including prohibitions on editors using Scientology-connected IP addresses and preventing them from editing relevant articles. For example, articles about Zenu or whatever my grandmother's dog. I said that joke first like 15 hours ago, it feels like 16 hours ago now at this point. So yeah, they like fighting. And geopolitically, the patchwork and legal classification and understanding of the church around the world, it's a really interesting thing. And they can use their power to leverage international systems against national regulations, and they get away with it under the guise of religious freedom, which is crazy. And the tax exempt status? Give that to me! All right, so Now comes one, how about brainwashing? Allegations of mind control and thought reform have followed Scientology for decades, and we've talked about MKUltra on this channel for what seems like decades. Former members, mental health professionals, and government investigators have all raised concerns about the psychological techniques employed by the organization. These accusations aren't merely rhetorical, they are grounded in specific practices that have been documented throughout the history of Scientology. Take, for example, what we talked about a minute ago in regard to geopolitics in Australia. In 1965, the state of Victoria, Australia, published the Anderson Report, which was the first major government investigation into Scientology. And after hearing testimony from former members and examining Scientology's materials, the report concluded that Scientology is evil, its techniques are evil, its practice is a serious threat to the community, medically, morally, and socially, and its adherents are sadly deluded and often mentally ill. Holy f***ing shitballs. That's a damn come out swinging statement right there. The Anderson Report highlighted specifically the auditing process of Scientology, describing it as a form of authoritative hypnosis designed to increase suggestibility and compliance, and it documented how subjects were led through repetitive processes that wore down critical thinking and replaced that with absolute acceptance of the doctrines of Scientology. Most significantly, the report found that Scientology is a grave threat to family and home life. As well as causing financial hardship, it engenders dissension, suspicion, and mistrust among family members. Oh, what the fuck? Disconnection, we fucking talked about it. SPs, we've talked about it, dude. They're fucked up. And this is in 1965! How'd they get away with it for so long? So yeah, that's a pretty early assessment, the Anderson Report back in Australia. And that assessment isn't that difficult to reinforce and has been reinforced by other academic analysis of thought reform that have been done by doctors, smart people. For example, Dr. Robert J. Lifton, who created the 8 criteria for thought reform. He developed this from his study of communist brainwashing techniques, and it provides a framework that experts have applied to Scientology. Take, for example, the following. 1. Milieu control. Scientology exercises extensive control over members' information, environment, particularly in the Sea Org, where access to unapproved materials is strictly limited. 2. Mystical manipulation. The organization attributes special powers to L. Ron Hubbard, their god basically, and positions everyday events as confirmation of Scientology's effectiveness. There are a lot of quotes and many things to suggest that L. Ron Hubbard genuinely believed he was a magic person. I mean, look at some of these fucking insane quotes, like this one. That I believe in my gods and spiritual things, that my magical work is powerful and effective. You are psychic. He would say that to himself. It was a mantra. 3. Demand for purity. Members of Scientology must constantly strive for higher states through auditing and courses. Any failures attributed to personal inadequacy rather than flaws in Scientology itself. Of course, you didn't follow the writings of our psychic genius vampire L. Ron Hubbard. 4. Confession. Security checking requires members to confess overts, which are transgressions, and withholds, which are secrets, which are permanently recorded and potentially used against them. We've talked about this 15 times, but they get secrets out of people, and then they use them to get tax-exempt status from the IRS. 5. Sacred science. Hubbard's writings are presented as an absolute truth that cannot be questioned, with the claim that questioning itself indicates one's failure to understand them properly. So it's like, it's written into itself that it's bad. 6. Loading the language. Scientology has created an extensive, specialized, quite fun vocabulary that shapes how members perceive reality and makes communication with non-members difficult. For example, like when an Oompaville viewer goes to their friend and says, and then the person says, they're communicating. But if you go to, let's say, your aunt or whatever, and you go, and then she's like, you go, oh, right there, just like that. Straight hand, just like that. 7. Doctrine over person. Personal experiences that contradict Scientology's teachings are dismissed as misunderstood or misapplied tech rather than evidence against the teachings. Of course they are. 8. Dispensing of existence. The concept of suppressive persons creates a worldview where critics are not merely disagreeing but are fundamentally evil and undeserving of normal ethical consideration. It's a club and we're not in it. So yeah, it's pretty
clear. Scientology uses techniques that appear designed to induce compliance and bypass critical thinking. There's a couple weird training routines as well. For example, TRs, particularly TR0, is a routine in which participants stare into each other's eyes without blinking or moving for extended periods of time. It sounds fun, but it also makes you hypnotized, apparently. Some professionals have said that it can increase your level of suggestibility. I don't know what the looking into each other's, I mean, that's so odd. Gazing, sun gazing. Look at the sun. If you're a Scientologist, look at the sun every morning, like Mr. Based does before he manipulates and exploits Joshua Block. Another technique that you've probably seen if you've seen Going Clear or any really, popular Scientology stuff is repetitive questioning, which is used in auditing. Sometimes the same question can be asked dozens or hundreds of times until the correct realization is achieved. It's interrogation, which is not even allowed anymore. We can't even do that to our enemies. Plus the Sea Org, plus you've got sleep deprivation, that's what the Sea Org does. It's fucking mind control. This is MK Ultra on another level, and it's totally fine because it's not the government. It's not totally fine. They suck. They both suck. They've also got sleep deprivation, isolation from outside perspectives. They enforce that. Members are discouraged from consuming Theta, which is negative information about Scientology, aka facts, and that potentially disconnects them from critical family members. And in the Sea Org, they may have minimal contact with the outside world for years or even decades. Then we get to the E-meter, all right? Scientology's primary auditing tool looks like this. It's kind of cool looking. Kind of want one, in all honesty. Dumbasses and idiots claim that this device can detect hidden thoughts and emotions, and auditors can convince members that the organization has access to their innermost mental state, which creates a sense that nothing can be hidden from Scientology in the all-seeing eye of L. Ron Hubbard. I bet he didn't see that early death of his coming. So yeah, when you bring up any of this stuff to Scientology, what do you think they say, guys? Take a wild guess below. They deny, they say, while other traditional faith-based religions encourage confession, also use specialized language, and require dedication from adherents, like us. But the intensity, the systemization, and the totality of the control of Scientology goes far beyond any religious practice. It's a fucking cult, is what it is. And because it's a cult, few members who are actively engaged in the institution of Scientology would consider themselves brainwashed or under mind control, but former members consistently, across the board, unanimously say, yeah, now that I think about it, that was brainwashing. So yeah, pretty fucking scary. Since assuming leadership following L. Ron Hubbard's death in 1986, David Miskovich has transformed Scientology in pretty significant ways. He's consolidated power, he's expanded the organization's real estate holdings quite drastically, and he's doubled down on high-pressure fundraising while membership numbers have plummeted massively. What is the future like for Scientology? How does an organization that's a fucking cult, and most people think is a cult, exist nowadays? How do you have to go after the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, the people who don't have internet, I guess, at this point. It's so bad, so sad, it's so dumb. But also, I get it. I mean, who wouldn't want to follow David Miskovich? His rise to power didn't follow Hubbard's explicit succession plan. Technically, Pat Broker, who had been with Hubbard in his final years, had run away with him or whatever, they touched penises, I think. He was positioned to take over. And according to Mike Rinder and Marty Rathburn, Miskovich outmaneuvered his potential rivals, ultimately removing Broker from power and establishing himself as the chairman of the Religious Technology Center, which is the organization controlling Scientology's trademarks and copyright. So he's like the big business guy, pretty much. People say that Miskovich's leadership style is authoritarian and volatile. They say he beats people, he assaults people, and the fact that his wife has been basically missing for a long-ass time is pretty fucking alarming, and I hope things change in a positive way in regard to Scientology, but they got so much money, there's not really much that can be done, and the IRS quite literally doesn't charge them anything on their taxes, so I'm not sure how much can be done in general. It is the end, though, for them, it seems. Under Hubbard, the goal was to recruit as many people as possible and become a cool science fiction, awesome, epic religion and do all this cool stuff. And under Miskovich, it's how do we get money from our dwindling members? How do we get money from Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise is like the last fucking guy.
pretty much. For real, the memberships are dwindling at an unprecedented rate, and things are looking bad. It's time for Scientology, I think, to put the prize in the bag. Although they're worth billions of dollars and have a lot of real estate holdings. So like, at the same time, you know, me saying put the fries in the bag is pretty f***ing dumb because they're so powerful. But like, I gain subscribers every day. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed, press the like button down below. If you want to see another 47-hour video, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one. Go to sour.gg, buy some candy, support the channel, or go to the Gump Club to get behind-the-scenes stuff, viewer mail, Too Late Show. It's pretty f***ing sick. Thank you guys so much.